Hello and welcome. I hope that you are enjoying today's episode where we're going to dive into the topic of mental health, behavioral issues in children, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit more of my daughter's personal story with PANDAS. So, if you are not aware of what PANDAS is, PANDAS stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder associated with streptococcus bacteria. So the other version of this, if you think of PANDAS as an umbrella disorder for multiple other disorders that kind of fall under it, is the diagnosis PANS, which is Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. So PANS, conversely, can be caused by any virus or bacteria that is not streptococcus. So PANS was come to be appreciated much later than PANDAS, which was initially recognized in the late 1990s, so 1998, around that time frame, by Dr. Sweeto. And you can go look into her research. Her research is phenomenal, and I would say groundbreaking and life-changing in the arena of behavioral and mental health for children. So as a pediatric nurse, I had seen maybe one case of truly diagnosed PANDAS in my 15-year career. Now, I think now having the personal experience of having my own child diagnosed with that there were many, many, many other children, specifically those in the eating disorder clinic and those who came in with other anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, those in the pediatric psychiatric unit that probably did have PANDAS, but we just didn't have the team and the structure and the criteria to accurately diagnose them. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about my journey discovering my daughter's diagnosis and what that's meant for us as a family. This is probably going to be multiple part series, but I hope that it benefits you for listening. Okay, so let me just start off by saying that I knew clinically what PANDAS looked like. I knew that based on the criteria, if you have PANDAS, meaning your child had a strep infection and they developed, rapid onset obsessive compulsive disorder, tics, Tourette's, etc., that it was fairly easy to diagnose if the clinician was aware of the diagnosis. Now, again, understanding what I know as a parent, having walked through this with my child, I know that that is not always the case, and for a lot of these children, it is a more slow onset versus a rapid onset. So for us, it was actually pretty rapid. I would say she got a strep infection in May of 2018, cleared the strep infection, meaning she got through the fever, she got through, the rash and, the redness in the back of the throat, the painful sore throat, etc., within about 48 hours. So actually very, very quickly recovered from the actual throat infection. And then we noticed just this very rapid decline in behavior over about a 2-week period of time. And I'm going to be very explicit with you about what that looked like so that if you are a parent or maybe you're a family member of somebody who is exhibiting these symptoms, that you can show up for them, you can help advocate in this situation, because even though it's been around for almost 30 years at this point, there are still very, very, very few practitioners who have versed themselves enough in this diagnosis to feel confident in diagnosing it. The other thing to remember with this is that this is a clinical diagnosis versus a laboratory diagnosis. So what that means is that we are going based almost solely and entirely off of clinical criteria versus a laboratory test, because there is no one laboratory test that can identify PANS or PANDAS. Okay, so I digressed for a second there. I apologize. So May 2018, she gets a strep infection. She is almost 8 at the time. And we noticed this very rapid regression in behavior. So our very articulate, bright, intelligent, happy, sleeping child turned into I don't really know how else to describe it other than a very, very, very deeply unhappy person, raging all the time, screaming, throwing things, having noise sensitivity, sensory meltdowns, hyperactivity, just through the roof, like almost overnight, within a 2-week period of time. And I just had this gut sinking feeling that this is my worst nightmare. And dear God, please don't let this be PANDAS. But somewhere inside of me, I think I knew. That that's what we were dealing with, but I was just hoping that I was wrong. And you're kind of in this daze because all of a sudden your life has just been flipped upside down. You go from parenting one way to have to parent a completely different way. All of our tools and strategies no longer worked. And so it was very, very, very scary. Even being a pediatric nurse, nothing can prepare you for having to see your child walk through this horrific illness. So I immediately made an appointment first with our naturopath, and just because she was a doctor that had been treating her, and I thought, I'd like to go the holistic route with this if at all possible, but I was being pretty persistent and aggressive. So I went in and I said, I just have this gut feeling that this is PANDAS. This is the timeline of her illness. This is the progression of her behavior. Can we look into this? Is there a test that we can run? What do we do? And she's like, no, it couldn't be PANDAS. We're just going to give something to calm her nervous system down. So we did some, light acupressure, some, Chinese herbs that actually did help kind of calm her down a little bit. But I mean, really it took it from like a 10 intensity to like an 8, not very much. The problem had not been resolved. Her pupils were still extremely dilated. They were dilated consistently for about 2 years beyond that point. And I was not satisfied with that. I was not satisfied with the brush off of, her symptoms. So I then went to our pediatrician who is very holistic minded, but has a pretty strong conventional background. And I just said, I didn't even present PANDAS at the time. I just said, here is the timeline. I don't know what to do. Like, just like, tell me, what am I missing here? And he said, I don't even need to run the test. This is classic PANDAS. There's no way this is not PANDAS. We're going to run her strep antibodies. We're going to look at her neurotransmitters. We're going to look at her gut. We have to get this kid help. And that was about 3 weeks after the strep infection, I want to say. So pretty quickly, he was on it. He, sure enough, the strep antibodies came back extremely high. And her neurotransmitters, her dopamine was in the toilet. Her serotonin was in the toilet. And it's like, no wonder this kid is absolutely miserable. So that began what I would say, and I know this is going to be a strong term, but really our descent into hell. And I was recently, just within the last week or so, reading a book for educators on PANS and PANDAS. So this is helping educators within the school system to identify PANS and PANDAS, and their experts, their double PhD masters, educators said that PANS and PANDAS is by far the most devastating childhood illness they've ever witnessed in a school setting. And I can say that as a parent, I would agree with that. I don't want to compare, our suffering to anybody else's, but I can tell you that it was absolutely devastating to our family to watch our bright, funny, happy, hilarious, goofy child just descend into a pit that we could not pull her from. And that we couldn't rescue her from that. We just had to walk her through that healing process and realize that it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of patience and finding the right treatment for her, because believe it or not, there is no one size fits all treatment for these children. It really does depend a whole lot on genetics. It depends a whole lot on their own biometrics. It depends on their physiology. It depends on the different viruses and bugs that might be influencing them. And so we initially did the genetic testing to see, okay, are there any genetic variances here that are influencing that? That was about a $4,000 test. And then we moved on to doing a different level of neurotransmitter testing to see if there were antibodies like working against her neurotransmitters. And then we had to go be put on a wait list for a neuropsychiatric evaluation. So this was after the school district actually refused to do an IEP. So she was, let's see, the end of second grade at that time. By the time we were able to get into her school system and request an IEP, which is an individualized education plan where I met with the teachers and the support staff, and just to make sure that I was covering my bases, really. I wanted to make sure that she had support in the classroom for any neurological flares that I was not able to witness myself. And they did not do an IEP, which meant that we couldn't get a neuropsych evaluation covered by the state. And so we had to go elsewhere to find a private practitioner who would do a neuropsych evaluation, which ultimately I'm really glad that we went that route because she only works with children. She's well-versed in PANDAS. And she's an expert in her field. She comes highly recommended in the region. Her name is Dr. Nancy Loss. I will make sure to put her information in the show notes for today. But we really just wanted to see what's her executive function look like. What areas is she lacking in? What deficits does she have? What skills do we need to build? Which then gave us a whole plethora of information to take to physical therapy, occupational therapy, her doctors, anybody that's involved in her care could easily see, okay, these are the areas that we need to provide scaffolding and support because her brain can't do it right now. So there were multiple layers of testing that we had to do to kind of put all of the pieces together. We wanted to know what was going on with her neurotransmitters, what was going on with her nutrients, was she getting the right amount of vitamins and minerals into her body that would actually help support the natural neurological functions that she needed. Was there bacterial overgrowth? Was there strep hanging out, in her intestines? And then finally, that executive function piece, which really did help us to put several different pieces together and actually help create a support plan for her that would enable her to move through this illness and actually give us kind of some mile markers, for lack of a better word, for how what her progress would look like. So just to reiterate, this was not a blood test that showed us that she had strep. This was the antibodies in the blood test that said, okay, she's clearly having an autoimmune reaction to the strep bacteria. Now we need to see how is this impacting all of these other global issues in her body. And so we had all of this information, and we're trying to now find a practitioner who can work with all of this information. So is there one that can somehow do all of this? And we ended up first working with our holistic pediatrician, got her started on a whole bunch of supplements to fill the gaps, and did start to see some minor shifts or improvements. But it really wasn't until it was about a year later that we found a homeopath in California, Resilience Naturopathic, Dr. Jennifer Barr, and her team that truly, they only work with children with PANS and PANDAS, that our life actually began to get better. Up until that point, we had been, trying to basically support her neurochemistry. We had been trying to support her dopamine production, make sure she's getting all of these minerals. And we're seeing, we saw it's kind of like calming down the storm, but she was still, anytime she was exposed to a virus or a bacteria or allergies, it would cause this huge neurological flare. So I knew we weren't really quite at the root of what was going on in her body. I knew that autoimmune disease would continue to progress if we didn't get a handle on this thing. And so after seeing testimonial after testimonial after testimonial, I finally decided to book a call with their naturopathic team and see if Alexis was a good fit. And so we went from, within that first month, I'll have to pull up my notes because yes, I did keep track of all of the behaviors, which is really, really, really important if you're wanting to watch the progression of healing. for your child to actually keep really good notes of what they're experiencing. But she went from 5-hour rages a day to 45 minutes a day to once a day to once a week to